Picture this. You're suddenly and inexplicably stripped of your verbal faculties, unable to speak or even utter a peep. You'd be a mime trapped in an invisible box, or more accurately, a prisoner of your own body. And your voice box might as well be a rusted-out jalopy. Sounds ghastly, doesn't it? Now amplify that horror by imagining yourself in a high-stakes face-off with the police. The ominous sirens blaring, and the harsh blue and red lights disorienting. Your tongue is tied, your vocal cords frozen. That's the nightmare scenario we're diving into today. Let's spin the yarn of John Kelley, a man from the Lone Star State, Texas, who, like Beethoven, was deaf, but who, unlike Beethoven, wasn't exactly serenaded by the police. Picture him strolling down the road, as innocent as a newborn lamb, when out of nowhere he is swarmed by officers, who seem to mistake him for the Unabomber reincarnate. And his unspeakable crime? You'll never guess. He was signing the linguistic ballet of the hands that for deaf people, like John and his wife, serves as the one lifeline to the world of communication. The story, strange and twisted as a pretzel, unfolds like this. John and his wife had a bit of a spat. Nothing new for couples, right? Except their spat involved sign language, and their nosy neighbor, a real-life Karen, mistook their signing for some sort of physical altercation. Perhaps she should have borrowed a pair of bifocals before ringing up 911. Enter our knights in shining armor, the stalwarts of the San Marco Police Department. You'd think these officers, bearing the weighty responsibility of protecting and serving, would have undergone rigorous sensitivity training for dealing with individuals with disabilities like our deaf protagonist. This is where you'd be wrong as putting ketchup on a steak. Now, we have some video footage from the scene. YouTube's rather puritanical guidelines prevent us from showing John's tasering, but we can scrutinize the moments leading up to this electrifying event. So grab your popcorn and let's play detective, shall we? As expected, John writhes in agony as 50,000 volts surge through him. Quite the shock, isn't it? I mean, I'm no electrician, but I imagine that's a bit like sticking your finger in a socket. Now, unless my brain has suddenly been replaced by a pot of cold porridge, it looks like John was walking with his hands up, signaling to the officers that he was about as threatening as a stuffed animal. Let's not forget that his hands are his sole means of communicating. It's like trying to chat on the phone with no reception. Frustrating, isn't it? Once John is down, the officers continue barking commands at him, as if he's a disobedient puppy. If they'd given him a chance to respond, before unleashing their electric fury, they might have understood why he wasn't obeying. Interestingly, even while being tased, John shields his hands, his only tools for communication.
Put your hands behind your back! Hands behind your back! Do it now!
Finally mustering all his strength, John tries to convey his deafness to the officers through his facial expressions and gestures. This revelation deflates the situation like a punctured balloon, and the officers realize their gargantuan blunder. A visibly agitated and seething John continues to sign to the officers, who keep yakking away as if they're in a one-way conversation with Alexa.
Okay. Put your hands behind your back, sir. Alright, grab his hand. Stand up. Stand up. Stand up.
Now, I'm not sure whether their failure to understand that deaf people can't hear is a product of a deficiency in police training, or an unfortunate oversight in their upbringing. Either way, they persist in their demands for John to turn around and put his hands behind his back. Like a stalwart defender of his own rights, John refuses to comply, instead gesturing for a pen and paper. The man's no fool. He knows that once he's in cuffs, he might as well be a mute monk. Communication, as they say, is key, and without it, he'd be lost in a sea of silent confusion.
Get on your stomach! Turn around! Just have him stand up. I think he's hurting. Let me see your hands. Hands. Let me see your hands.
Finally, the officers allow John to sit, and he vents his frustration with the fiery ferocity of a teapot reaching its boiling point. But wait, there's a twist. One of the officers responds with rudimentary signs, revealing some prior knowledge of sign language or deaf culture. Yet his failure to apply this knowledge earlier resulted in the regrettable spectacle we're all witnessing. Now, tasers are generally employed by law enforcement as a less deadly alternative to firearms. Each jurisdiction has its own policies, often emphasizing the importance of officer training and proper threat assessment. The policies usually dictate that tasers should only be deployed when there's an immediate threat, and less forceful methods have proven ineffective or inappropriate. But from our video replay, it's apparent that John was no more of an immediate threat than a turtle crossing the road. His refusal to comply with verbal commands may have seemed strange initially, but this should have prompted the officers to use nonverbal cues to get his attention. The effects of being tased can vary depending on the individual's health, age, and the circumstances of deployment. While tasers are designed to temporarily incapacitate, they can cause injuries or worse, particularly if the recipient falls or has an underlying health condition. Yet, our brave officers decided that the risk was worth it because, John was walking. Finally, one officer hands him some paper and a pen, enabling communication at last.
Hold it. Give me your name.
In a poignant moment of silent defiance, John points to each officer who tased him, asking why. This single word, this single sign should echo in their minds every time they reach for their tasers. The incident concluded with paramedics being called to assess John's physical condition after the tasing, including the removal of taser prongs from his back. He was never criminally charged and was allowed to leave once the paramedics were done with him. However, this was not the end of the story. John later filed a civil rights lawsuit against the San Marco Police Department and the 3 officers involved after being hospitalized due to the encounter. The officers claimed in their report that John had tucked his hands into his torso, a clear discrepancy from what we can see in the video. What's the cherry on top of this absurd sundae? All 3 officers remain employed, and would you believe it? They've completed a 4-hour course on interacting with drivers who are deaf or hard of hearing. Makes you wonder what they were doing during those 4 hours, doesn't it?